I have journeyed through the long dark night, out on the open sea. My faith alone, sight unknown, and yet his eyes were watching me. The anchor holds, though the ship is battered. The anchor holds, though the sails are torn. I have fallen on my knees as I face the raging seas. The anchor holds, in spite of the storm. I've had visions, I've had dreams, I've even held them in my hand. But I never knew they would slip right through, like they were only grains of sand. The anchor holds, though the ship is battered. The anchor holds, though the sails are torn. I have fallen on my knees as I face the raging seas. The anchor holds, in spite of the storm. I have been young, and I am older now, and there has been beauty these eyes have seen. But it was in the night, through the storms of my life. Oh, that's where God proved His love to me. And the anchor holds, though the ship's been battered. The anchor holds, though the sails are torn. I have fallen on my knees as I face the raging seas. The anchor holds, in spite of the storm.
Well, I want to welcome you again to another edition of the Mind of Christ. This study was started by me back in 2010 when I decided to do a complete assessment of the mind of Christ. Uh, I decided to go through all of the things that Jesus said, all the things he did, and to do an in-depth study of this so that I could understand him better. You know, Paul said, I want to know Christ, and that was my motivation. I want to know Christ. And so it was a great study for me. It lasted 7 years, I produced 21 journals. And so about a year and a half ago, some people asked me if I would begin recording some of the things that I found in this study. And I decided to take the study from my journals themselves, and it is an in-depth study. It is not easy. It is complicated sometimes. It's one of those studies where you would best do a couple of things. One is have your Bible handy, and also be ready to pause at certain points in order to think about what's being said or to study it further, and then go on, because it is meat. It's not milk, and it must be slowly digested. Like I said, it took me 7 years to digest much of this, and I'm still processing much of what I studied. I decided to follow A.T. Robertson's Harmony of the Gospel, where he divides the life of Christ into several sections. And so I'm on section 53 of the Harmony of the Gospels, and this is a place where Jesus chooses his apostles. This is the selection of the 12 that he designates as apostles, and the story is found in two accounts of the Gospels. One is in Mark and the other is in Luke. Matthew and John do not record this incident. So we're going to be reading from Mark and Luke in order to get our text together here. So in Mark, the third chapter, starting in verse 13 through 19, here's what the scripture says. And he went up to the mountain, and he summons those whom he himself wanted. And they came to him, and he appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach, and to have authority to cast out the demons. And he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, and James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder, and Andrew, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. So that's how Mark gives us the account. We'll go over to the book of Luke, the 6th chapter, and we'll begin in verse 12 through 16. Luke, the 6th chapter, 12 through 16. And it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples to him, and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, and James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon who was called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And so that's the account that we have in the book of Luke. One of the things that's amazing to me is that Jesus did so much ministry before selecting the 12. We've covered a lot of ground so far, and we're just now getting to the point where Jesus chose the 12. I believe that we're about at least a year into his ministry, and so the whole time that he actually trained the 12 per se as a group probably was only about the last couple of years of his ministry. Um, these disciples that followed him from place to place, um, we can only be sure of certain ones that have been named up to this point. We know that Jesus chose Peter, Andrew, James, and John and told them to follow him, even though he had not yet designated them to be apostles. And and we also may have, up to this point, have Nathaniel and Matthew also being called. So at most, we only have about 6 of the 12 that have in any way surfaced on our radar up to this point. But it doesn't mean that the others were not in the crowd of disciples or people who had already stated their allegiance to him. In fact, the very text that we just read indicates that. So Luke begins with Jesus spending all night in prayer to God on the mountain. Also, he will deliver next, after this, his famous Sermon on the Mount, after this all-night prayer vigil. And so there's a couple of things that we see in this prayer vigil that Jesus had all night on the mountain. One is he's going to the next day select his apostles. And secondly, he's going to deliver the most famous sermon that is in the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount. So at the end of the Sabbath, Jesus went to pray, and from the text we see that as number one, it was deliberate. In other words, very intentional, going out to this place to pray. Number two, it was an isolated place. Number three, it was for a long period of time. Number four, it was requiring great discipline to pray without sleep, coming off the previous day's events. And number five, the prayer, of course, is addressed to God. So seeing that he came down and chose his 12 apostles and delivered his first major recorded address, we can only surmise that that was what he was praying about. So why did the choosing of the 12 and the sermon to follow require such a night of devotion? Ephesians chapter 2, 19 through 20 says that God's household is built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Jesus as the cornerstone, this dwelling where God lives by his Spirit. The apostles would play an important role in the formation of this new temple, the church. Paul, who becomes part of this elite and unique group later, tells Timothy that our task is to entrust what has been given to us to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And Acts chapter 1 makes much out of the apostles being witnesses. Chapter 1, verse 8, you shall be my witnesses. And later in chapter 1, 21 and following, the necessity of the apostles, the apostle who would replace Judas, he must be a witness, especially of the resurrection of Jesus. These, except John, were as witnesses martyred for their faith or for their testimony. 1 John chapter 1, verse 1 does stress this role, and Paul, who had a special witness of Jesus on the road in Arabia and in the third heaven, also stresses the witnessing work in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 1. Jesus made it clear from John chapter 5 that human witness was an aid to people being saved, but that he knew the witness of the Father was sufficient for him. And so Jesus was in the choosing of the 12, he was choosing witnesses. He was choosing people who would be with him, who could testify what he did and what he said. Now, did these 12s know this day and this designation would change their lives forever? It would actually bring about great joy and intense suffering. They were being appointed to one of the most significant roles ever given by God to man. Could Peter, John, and Paul ever imagine so many boys being named after them? Well, from disciples to apostles. Well, from learners, in a sense, to graduates. Sent out. Yes, Jesus was not finished with them yet, but he had a lot more to teach them, but he was designating them as people who were sent out. The process was calling, choosing, and then naming. The calling was broader than the choosing and the naming. Many are called, but few are chosen, Matthew 22, verse 14. In this case, Jesus calls his disciples, those in this location or those who were accustomed at this point to follow him on his circuit. The broader theme of calling people by the gospel is to come to his banquet, as in Matthew 22, it goes out to everyone. But in Acts 2:39, he says, "For the promise is for you and your children, and for all who are far off, as many as the Lord our God shall call to himself." This is the broader calling. But there was a special calling for these apostles. In this, we see the calling of the Gentiles. They were the ones who were far off. The calling is a major theme of Scripture. The Calvinist world makes the calling selective to those that Jesus died for, i.e., those previously chosen or elected by God for salvation. The Scriptures makes clear that the call is to all who hear his voice, those who have ears to hear. Only those listening can be effectively called. Calling lends to selection or choice. In this case, the choice of the 12 was sovereign and it was exclusive. It was based on those who had answered the call to discipleship. Jesus from that group chose 12. Now, some of them had been previously called specifically, though perhaps all of them hadn't. We just don't have the record. But from the pool of disciples, 12 were separated out for apostleship. Of course, the number 12 is significant for the new Israel, those through whom a new progeny will emerge, new Christians of Israel, or new children of Israel, new 12 tribes to carry the message, to be a light to the Gentiles. And so there is this correlation between the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. Apostles, or the word apostle, means one who is sent, an ambassador or a messenger, one who has been commissioned by Christ. It's apostello. It means from, and it means to send off, to send forth. Why does God use agency or agents, angels, prophets, evangelists, teachers? He has every ability to do it himself. Even the incarnation, with the exception of the physical death and resurrection, could have been accomplished without agency. But he uses people to get his work done. Agency is such an integral part of God's work. It seems it must proceed out of his character. The word is used of others beyond the 12, as we see in Philippians 2:25, of Epaphroditus, who was their messenger, and so he could be called an apostle, but not in the sense that the 12 were called apostles. And John 13 and verse 16 gives us this principle. Neither is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. In Luke 11:49, Jesus says, "It is the wisdom of God who says, I will send to them apostles and prophets, and some of them they will kill, and some of them they will persecute." In Revelation 2 and verse 2, the Ephesians put some so-called apostles to the test and found them to be false. And so there can be false prophets as well. Mark says that he appointed 12. The word appointed, with a wide meaning, it means to make or to do. Jesus is bringing about the 12 from common, ordinary men. Mark says he did this with three purposes in mind: to be with him, to send them out to preach, and to have authority to cast out demons. That was the reason that he called these. That's the reason he appointed them, is for these three purposes. The process of training the apostles was one of being with Jesus. Later in Acts chapter 4 and verse 13, this will be one of the distinguishing marks of the uneducated and trained men. They were marveling, and they began to recognize them as having been with Jesus. Something happens when you spend time with Jesus. What happens is transformation. 2 Corinthians 3 and 4, and you can read those chapters. Jesus modeled the message and revealed the Father by word and deed. This traveling band of brothers, of students, were slowly changed by spending time on the road in various situations with Jesus. John wrote this in 1 John 1 and verse 1 and following. What we heard, what was seen, what we handled, this personal, direct contact with the word of life made them witnesses. The second part of their training was to send them out to preach. To send out is our apostle word. To preach is kerusso, means to herald or proclaim or to publish or to announce. They will be, as John the Baptist and Jesus did, they're going to announce the gospel, the kingdom, and the Christ Messiah. They will get the word out, serving as witnesses as well. From their previous vocations, this is a major retooling. We will see that they are given supernatural help to do this. Human agency to get such a precious and essential message out should amaze us. God is showing such confidence in these 12 men. Then the third purpose of their calling was to be able to cast out demons. For this they would need authority. Exousia is the word: ability, privilege, force, capacity, competency, freedom, mastery. This would be no small task if for no other reason than to build within these men the faith and the tools of prayer and fasting needed to tackle these dreadful creatures that we call demons. What must these 12 have been thinking as they hear their job description? And what must Jesus be thinking to choose 12 uneducated, common men for such a task? 1 Corinthians 1 comes to my mind. God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For 1 Corinthians 1:21. And then he goes on to say, for consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, that no man should boast before God. 1 Corinthians 1:26 through 29. And then in 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 7, Paul says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the surpassing greatness of the power may be of God and not from ourselves. Jesus did not want the strength or the power to be in the messenger or the vessel due to some earthly credentials, but in the message itself and the person of the message, Jesus Christ. Could this be what Jesus was thinking? The way the list names is given is slightly different. If you look at it in Mark and then in Luke, there's a little difference in the list. I'll try to make this clear. This is a little complicated here. But Mark talks about Simon, and then he adds, to whom he gave the name Peter. Luke talks about Simon, and he just simply says, who he also named Peter. Very similar. And then Mark talks about James, the son of Zebedee, and Luke simply adds to that, and Andrew, his brother. And so obviously and Andrew, his brother, is connected with Peter because Peter's brother was Andrew. In the third one is in Mark it says John, his brother, again associated with James, the son of Zebedee, and to them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. And then in Luke, next it says, and James, simply James in Luke. And then the fourth name is in Luke, in Mark, is and Andrew. Then Andrew is brought up. And then in Luke, the fourth is and John. So again, it gets very complicated here when you begin to look at the list and try to take them in order. The order doesn't match up. Mark, for the fifth disciple, Mark uses Philip, and Luke also has Philip as the fifth one in the order. Mark, for the sixth one in the order, talks about Bartholomew, and Luke also has Bartholomew as the sixth one in the order. The seventh one in the order with Mark is Matthew, and Luke also has Matthew named as the seventh one. The eighth one in Mark is Thomas, and Luke also has Thomas. And then the ninth one is, Mark says, James, the son of Alphaeus, and also Luke has the ninth one as being James, the son of Alphaeus. And then number 10, Mark has Thaddeus, and Luke has Simon, who is called the Zealot. Number 11 has Simon the Zealot in Mark. And number 11, Luke has Judas, the son of James, mentioned. And then number 12, Mark says Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him, and Luke says Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Now, again, I know that's very complicated, but I encourage you to go back and look at the list in Mark and Luke and compare the list. I surmise that Thaddeus and Judas, the son of James, are the same person. So in Acts chapter 1 and verse 13, the list is, there's another list there in Acts 1:13, and it has it in this order: Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and then of course Matthias was added in Acts 1 and verse 26. Well, since the apostles had a thing about who was the greatest, I wonder how this figured into the listing. Peter is always first, and Andrew and James and John are always next in every list. In John 1:43, Philip found Nathanael. Was he one of the 12? If so, which one? Probably Bartholomew. In the list, we also see some changes as in Simon, who became Peter, and James and John, who were called sons of thunder, and then a couple of distinctives as in Simon the Zealot, who was obviously a zealot, very much like maybe Barabbas, who was trying to overthrow the Roman government. And then, of course, Judas, who is called a traitor. So in two cases, the parentage was given in regard to the sons of Zebedee and the son of Alphaeus. So this was Jesus' special band of brothers who occupied that special relationship and special mission. This too goes to the heart of Jesus' thinking. As a rabbi, he had the choice of how he would educate these men. He chose to have a traveling band who learned by doing on-the-job training and by receiving teaching on the road. This was not typical for Jesus' day for a class of students. Their training will last about 2.5 to 3 years. Actually, I think perhaps more as a group, more about 2 years, and will forever change their lives. Well, that's the introduction, or that's the summary of the choosing of the 12. Obviously, as we go on, we will see individual ones who are highlighted in the Gospels where Jesus interacted with them. Some of them, though, are never mentioned again specifically, and so that's very interesting as well. But these are the men that Jesus is going to pour his life into. that he is going to, if you will, disciple. He's going to make disciples who will then go out to make other disciples. And so how he works with these men is important for us to understand how we too can imitate Jesus in this disciple-making process. Well, I hope this has been beneficial to you. We encourage you to go to our website, centralsarasota.org, and you can find many resources there to engage in different ways with other things that we're doing through the Central Church of Christ, and encourage you to do that. Until next time, I'm going to sign off, and thank you for joining us.